Hi, Neil. Welcome to Drag and Drop.
Hey, Feroz. Thank you for inviting me.
I've followed you for a while. I know you've been active in the Mendix community, so I thought you'd be a good guest to get on. So I appreciate you taking the time and joining me for a conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've been very active on LinkedIn through my posts and some videos. Started with YouTube and then went on to LinkedIn
Yeah,
and now writing posts and articles on LinkedIn. So try
nice.
to spread as much knowledge as I can.
Great, great. Well, before we kind of dive in, it'd be good for, for you to give us a bit of a background to yourself, a bit more about yourself so people can understand, you know, obviously they could look at your LinkedIn and see where you are now, but a bit of that journey.
Yeah. I started as a Mendix developer for the Mendix Expert Services team. So I've been there for a very short time, but then while being there, I realized the potential of Mendix. So I moved out of that and started going along as a contractor. From there, I've seen more potential. So started building a team since early last year. Until early last year, I was the only developer working all by myself. And today we are a team of 6+ people. So which is which is yeah, which has been a very exciting journey for me, and it's
Yeah.
totally unprecedented at least.
Yeah, yeah. Before Mendex, what were you working as?
Before Mendix, I've been my background and studies wise has been computer science, right? So,
Yeah.
but it was never low code. I was
Mm,
After I finished my master's in the US, I was a customer success engineer for a company called Dynamic Yield,
mm.
and which was bought later by McDonald's, and then now Mastercard owns it. But then went back to India from there. I was a couple years in the real estate actually when in
Okay.
India,
Nice.
and came back to Canada and started my journey here. When I was in Dynamic Yield, I was working with the guy named Connor who was at that. And then when I came to Canada, he was part of Mendix's expert services team. So he's the one who referred me to it. Amazing person, still my very good friend. So he remembered me after 6 years once I came to Canada, which
Wow.
is
Wow.
we stayed in touch while we were there. But so he referred me, and that's how I got into Mendix.
It really shows the power of connections and network and, keeping in touch with people and leaving a good impression, doesn't it?
Certainly, yes.
And now that you've been kind of in the kind of Mendex community for a while, like you said, you started as a team of one, and now you've grown your team. From what you're seeing, when you're speaking to enterprise customers across North America, what are they actually trying to solve right now, and where do most you know low code and AI kind of conversations miss the mark?
I think what they are mainly trying to solve is how to get out of the legacy systems. And while they're exploring different options, I think with AI coming in, it's a surprise to all of us, to be honest. In the last six
Mm,
months, the growth we have seen with AI is something we have never seen any technology grow that faster, right? Even when the internet revolution came in, internet did not come in so fast.
yeah.
Everyone did not have Shopify stores or e-commerce stores from day two, but here with AI, the pace at which, for example, Cloud Code came out and everyone started vibe
Mm,
coding their apps, it is it is not it was not expected to be this fast. At least I did not expect it to be this fast, right? And and with that, what has happened is the enterprises who are trying to move out of legacy systems now there's some kind of confusion whether they should go with something like low code or they
mm,
should just go with AI. So I think there are more options now, but the decision also becomes very difficult for them. So those are the conversations that I'm seeing people
yeah.
being torn apart on what to pick.
Yeah. And I think even today and for years, people have been skeptical of low code, right? You know, when enterprises say, we tried low code and it didn't scale, what do you usually see as the real failure point?
It's honestly, I think for me it's two main things. First is how they were sold the low code platform, what they sold to them as a something like a citizen development tool, right? Which
Mm,
any product owner can go in and build apps by drag and drop. Or was it sold to them as an enterprise platform where you need serious developers, serious solution architects? And what I've seen is the things we have all or the companies who always succeeded has had great leadership on the software engineering side. At least with all my customers, I've seen that if they bring in product developers or people who don't know they don't have the architectural background, then it becomes difficult. For example, if they were sold as a Java platform, and then
Mm,
you bring in Java developers who don't know a lot about how DevOps works, right? Then they won't
mm.
know what could cause problems when the app is deployed to production and when 1,000 users or 5,000 users are using it simultaneously. So that's one thing. And then that same thing also ties down to the knowledge and training.
Mm.
You sold a platform. Now this is a new technology. And if people start taking it as a, again, drag and drop tool
Yeah.
and not get the necessary knowledge and training to use this tool, then they're not going to understand the deep insights of how Mendix works.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what those are the companies that that I've generally seen who said we tried low code and it didn't scale. It's because they didn't have the right tools or the right resources to do it.
Yeah, I agree with the training point where I think a lot of them, because they think obviously citizen development or it's easy to use, they might do either some self-guided training online or something really quick. And then the developers don't really learn the best practices of the platform and it either ends in a car crash or the developer itself leaves, right? They go continue doing what they're doing.
And it's not only with Mendix, but it's with all low code
Yeah,
platforms.
yeah, yeah,
Even
definitely.
Power
Yeah.
Platforms is something that is the easiest to start on for people, but you still
Mm.
need to understand how it works in the background.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And in regulated industries like banking and fintech, what conditions do you think must exist before low code is really trusted with these mission critical workloads?
I think the real barrier in those industries is not the technical aspect of it, but it's more organizational, I would say, on the leadership level or the business side of things, right? Where security, compliance, governance, all these teams need to be brought into for early evaluation and not just developers trying some demo projects on if
Mm,
this will work or developers like it or not, right? So it has to be end to end evaluation. What some companies do is try this as say phase one is MVP, right? And then they kind of like it because it's a small scale thing, and then they try phase two, which they want to put in production, and that's when they bring in these teams. But by that time, this refactoring phase one to be to be
mm,
compliant for all these multiple teams becomes a problem. And I think it this goes for all apps, not only local, right? Because
mm.
now you want audit trail, traceability of your data, or enterprise grade deployment pipelines, and like compliance in terms of like GDPR, where your data lives, where or how it's encrypted, and all those things.
Yeah, yeah. And you touched on security, and obviously security is a major focus for you, right? Where do Mendix teams most commonly, underestimate that risk?
I've seen a lot of things, right? One of the things I've seen is when we hosted the Capture the Flag in Montreal last year. It was a
Mm,
satellite location, but it happened
yeah.
worldwide. I spoke on the topic of content security policy, which means how your browsers have to treat your app for the
Mm,
external vulnerabilities. And most teams did not even know there's something like content security policy, right? So it's a very important tool for front end apps, where browser can save a lot of attacks on you. And teams not knowing about this is something crazy. And you don't even need any extra code for that. Mendix platforms like Mendix gives you all the tools. So you just need to configure it. That's one of the things. And then, but there's a pattern, right? The pattern is that teams treat security as a like separate work stream. First build the app,
yeah.
and then and then keep it for later. Now what happens is later never comes, and everything becomes over permissive, which means you cannot your apps when they go to production, you have a really hard time passing the all the compliances basically.
With Capture the Flag, like you said, obviously it's security focused, and your satellite location, that awareness that you bring to obviously people who are, part of your joining your sessions, are they quite surprised, or are they kind of, like you said, they've just got the mindset of this is an afterthought. It's not really that important.
No, most people were surprised how Mendix has so many security options, right? The content security policy was just one seminar that I did, but it was 2 days of multiple challenges, and there were there were so many issues that people couldn't solve, or they did not even know those things
Mm,
existed. So most of the participants left the 2 day conference by learning a lot, and
yeah.
most of them implementing it in their real apps as well, because they would email me after asking for all the documentation and
Mm.
advice on what to do when they come up with issues in their app.
And what actually happens when, performance, security, and governance are treated as, that phase two instead of like day one concerns?
It only grows your technical depth, basically, right? um, and tech debt is something that every business side of the team wants to do it later, and by the time phase two arrives, because retrofitting an app with this performance and security and governance enhancements, it only becomes more and more expensive. Like when you are, for example, when you are creating a database table, adding row level security is easier at that point, right? In Mendix, you just have to do a few clicks and write the correct row level security. We call it XPath, but and then it becomes easy at that point. But say you created 10 different modules with each having um, 20 entities. If you have to do it in phase two, then now you have to go through and understand what you build in all of those entities, and making sure the app doesn't break, all the pages don't break, all the flows don't break. It just becomes a nightmare. And priorities of tech debt is something that the developer doesn't decide when to do it. It's the business who
Mm,
decides to do it. So if the developer ignored it in phase one, then it'll never be. I don't think it'll ever be. For most of the things, unless they're raised as a concern by some kind of audits, they
yeah,
will not become a priority for business. Because for business, for developer teams, it is business who decides the priority, and for the business teams, it is customer who decides the priority.
yeah,
So customers always want new features or bug fixes.
yeah. That's interesting. And, obviously, you being in the Mendix community, Mendix is very mature in Europe, right? Very well known, compared to US, Canada, where, yes, people know, but I think there's still a large gap when you compare it to Europe. What do you think, that is that down to an awareness gap, or do you think it's just a way that, North American enterprises have a different way of kind of buying software?
For Europe, I would put it this way, that Europe grew up with Mendix.
Yeah, yeah.
They they have a very, very mature partner ecosystem. When Mendix was new, they were very focused on a lot of things. And when it was not a part of Siemens, they had more freedom about things breaking.
Mm, mhm.
Build fast, break, fix fast. That
Yeah,
that kind
sure.
of mentality. But with Siemens, they have a lot of they have a lot of things to worry about, right? So it's not
Mm,
like a small startup now. Now
yeah,
it's bigger enterprise
yeah,
where
sure.
they need to worry about a lot of things. So that's the reason I think when Mendix came to US as part of Siemens, it was already an enterprise level. So now things moves a bit slow, and also I feel that US enterprises are more procurement heavy. They don't know at first. Many enterprises don't know what low code is. So you have to teach them
Yeah.
what low code is. And then once you teach them, you have to tell them the differences between all the low code platforms. Once you tell them, you need to help them evaluate if Mendix is better for them or OutSystems is better. And it just it becomes a 2 year sales cycle at
Yeah,
that point.
yeah. Yeah, I can imagine there's a lot of awareness after awareness before you can even get into the software, right? And kind of dig deep into what they want.
And then if the right approach is not taken, many CIOs or many CTOs would put Mendix in the bucket of citizen development tool.
Mm.
So again, that's that all messaging also needs to be translated well, I think.
And you've touched on it just then, like, when CIOs hear the term low code, right? What are some assumptions that they're making that, actually don't reflect, in reality?
Yeah, I've never so I've always tried to sell my services to customers,
Mm,
not low code as a platform, but
yeah.
from what I hear with people is um the two main things. One is vendor lock-in, right? They want to make sure that if after say 3 years the platform didn't grow as they
Mm,
expected it to grow, or they've seen in the past from historic data, then are they locked in and how do they get
mm,
out of it? And then the second thing they also think of is citizen developers, right? As they touched earlier, is it something for citizen developers only? But with all of this, a new thing with AI in the recent months that people have started asking is, does AI make low code obsolete?
yeah.
And so now we have to answer those questions as well.
Yeah. And obviously, yeah, there's this conversation around, um, traditional development with AI versus low code with AI, right? Where kind of,
Yes.
how's it going to end up? But, what do you think, Mendix as a platform and ecosystem, as someone who's here, what do you think they still need to improve to kind of earn that deeper enterprise confidence?
I think the first, this thing has been ignored. Mendix as a platform is great for enterprises, but one thing that has always been ignored or never taken into priority is how important the developer ecosystem is, right? Growing the developer community is really, really important now because many Mendix customers cannot find great developers in their region, and hence they have to rely on maybe mid-level to mediocre developers,
Yeah,
or convert their other developers into Mendix developers, or rely on offshore or slower growth, right? Build one app at a time and not 5 apps at a time.
yeah,
And that also becomes challenging. For example, I was talking to one of my customers in New York City, and while I was pitching them our services, they're like, if I knew getting Mendix developers was so difficult from the market, I would
yeah,
have thought twice about choosing Mendix as a platform.
yeah.
And what you are doing with Out Systems is amazing because now you're partnering with universities, you're training students over
Mm,
there. So when they go out in the market, that it's going to flood the market with
yeah,
more out system developers than they are. And I think Mendix should be focusing on something like this as well. Here in Canada, me and my friend Patrick Bornier, we are the two Mendix MVPs. So we try to host meetups
yeah,
and spread as much as we can, but
yeah,
we
of
need more
course.
minds. Two is not
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah, and I agree. Even though we do recruiting for Mendix as well for customers, and sometimes, obviously, I think we touched on this when we spoke last time. If a customer's looking for someone to be on site in their state, the chances are probably 0 to 1,
Yes.
right? There's not going to be a whole short list of candidates, right? You'll be very lucky to find one, if not most likely, probably none. And if they're not open to fully remote, it just puts them in a real spot where they're frustrated, they're not happy, they're complaining. So I
Yes.
totally agree on that point.
And also, for example, if just take my company for example, because
Mm,
I'm so I'm so passionate about Mendix. What I did is I hired all these people, but they come from traditionally non-low code background. So I had to
yeah,
train
mm,
every employee to become a
yeah,
Mendix developer. So, and it's from my experience, it's not easy to train people, right? So you need to give time.
yeah,
It's a
yeah,
3-month process that I need to follow
yeah,
with every
definitely.
employee, and it's it's a huge undertaking, at least for a company my size, because
Yeah, sure.
I have to pay salaries while I'm training them. So
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a
after 3 months, they don't like low code, they leave, then that investment goes down the drain.
yeah, yeah. And that's what I was gonna say. Obviously, you're not even in the US, you're in Canada, right? So there's
Yeah.
probably even more of an awareness issue when it
Yes.
comes to Mendix. So how, when you're hiring these traditional people, I'm assuming most of them haven't heard of it when you're speaking to them. And then when they're now being introduced to the platform, have you had that this situation where, like you said, you invest the time of 3 months, and then in the end they decide this is not for me.
No, luckily it hasn't happened to me. So I would be
That's
very
good.
demotivated if that happens to me.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And coming back to a question about like just Mendix as a platform and ecosystem in the
Mm,
US, right? I also feel they they need to become more attractive to mid-sized businesses, like companies doing 10 million to 25 million kind of thing. Right? They're still
mm.
not enterprises, but they're not small as well. But
Yeah, sure.
sometimes the licensing cost comes into factor. So I understand Mendix gives a lot, but I think there
Mm.
has to be something to become attractive
More
to
attractive, yeah.
mid-sized businesses, which is
Yeah.
there in Europe, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
There are many
Yeah.
mid-sized companies that use Mendix. So it's not
Mm,
that it's not possible.
mm. Yeah. And you touched on, you're very active on LinkedIn. I've been following your posts that you've been, posting over the last few months, and you've built, Aid Lite and Aid Pro, agentic coding directly inside Studio Pro. What problem were you solving that existing AI copilots, weren't addressing?
Like the existing code pilots or AI co-pilots like Claude Code, right? They
Mm,
understand they understand Mendix. It's not that they don't, but they cannot directly write code inside Studio Pro. They can do
mm,
through CLI, command line interface, um, and which is by manipulating some of the Mendix's critical files, and that could, if not done well, it could end up corrupting the whole project, right? So
mm,
things like that. But at this point, Maya or Mendix's AI assistant, it has features where you can use it as an extension inside Studio Pro, and then it
mm,
executes commands for you. So they call it extensibility APIs. But those APIs will execute commands and you call it, and build your logic flows or databases and all those things, right? Now, I'm trying to do the same thing with 8 Lite and 8 Pro as well. Started
mm,
as an experiment, people loved it. So I
mm.
made it open source, and then people requesting more and more features because now they want to run their local LLMs. They
Yeah.
want to have their custom knowledge built in because as of today, you cannot add custom knowledge or custom instructions into Mendix's AI or
Mm.
Maya, right? Which you can do with 8 Pro. So those are some of the things that I'm trying to solve where people can customize how the AI builds their whole app by themselves and while using their own LLM as well.
And you've moved from read only AI to generating microflows. What was the biggest architectural challenge in allowing AI to write safely inside the IDE?
So I think the biggest challenge for me has been context engineering. I need to and I never knew when I started building 8 Pro that this would be
Mm,
a problem, right?
mm,
Because what I want to do is I had to make sure the AI doesn't hallucinate. AI writes uh, it reads all the context, it gives the right answers, it builds the right logic, and all those things while using the least amount of tokens or as fewer tokens as possible. So achieving all of these in a balanced way was the most difficult thing for me, I think. And it's an optimization that I need to keep doing on an ongoing basis. But from where I started to until now, I think I've done a pretty good job at it. For example, it tries to forget things or context and hallucinate a lot when you start doing when you give it a large task, right?
mm.
So say build an app, like the example I've always been using is build a splitwise like application which does xyz things and then like 5 paragraphs of instructions. Now it's easy for AI to forget those things, and so what I've done is I first give it to the whole task goes to AI, and then AI gives a phase wise building instructions, and then the user sees everything, approves it. Once the user approves it, it goes back to AI, and then the phase wise planning becomes task wise planning. And now for every task that the AI has to build for you, it only gets that part of the construct of the instructions. And so when it gets smaller instructions task by task, it does a good job at it. That's what I have seen. So So yeah, and then the extension manages task execution and all those things where once a task is complete, it goes and does the next task. But the AI doesn't have to remember that it has to do 20 tasks because it gets
Mm.
one task at a time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, those are some of the challenges and how I've come across them. But if you're talking about safety now, safety with these public LLMs is something that we don't know how they are using our data. So if I would say if you as a customer are using any AI and your app is some kind of your intellectual property, right? You don't want your code or algorithms to be seen by the LLMs. And I would always say use AI models like that you can run locally using local tools like Olama, right?
Mhm.
But being cautious and taking precautions is the best thing when it comes to safety in AI because we're not seeing any big incidents as of now, but doesn't mean we might not see with any
Yeah.
public AIs. So taking precautions from now and doing things locally or in your confined environments like Amazon Bedrock or in your
Mm.
Azure environments is I think something that I generally recommend to enterprises.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've emphasized on hallucination prevention, right? Do you feel that AI assisted development is actually safer inside a structured low code platform than traditional code bases?
It kind of is from my point of view because last week I wrote a whole LinkedIn article about it where I mentioned that um, uh, where I mentioned that low code platforms were actually built for AI assisted development, but it's just that they never knew that's their purpose.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that is you don't have to start from scratch, or the AI doesn't have to start writing code from scratch. For example, how to sort a list. Then sorting a list already exists in Mendix, right? It's just a pre-made function that you just have to execute basically. And we don't have to, the AI doesn't have to write a sorting function from the start. And then the visual aspect also comes into the picture where if AI writes 1,000 lines of code in 10 minutes, I'm not going to review all of those to be honest.
Yeah.
But if AI writes 10 microflows in 5 minutes, it's easier for me to review. So I think those are some of the advantages where, and then also these low code platforms, not only Mendix, but say OutSystems as well, right? For them, they already platforms where governance is built in, right? And
Mm.
not something that you bolt on. So
Yeah.
and then same for security and all those things. So I think if these tools do well in terms of helping people with AI assisted development, they have a long way to win from because I'm a Mendix MVP, I get earlier access to product roadmaps. And from what
Mm.
I have seen, there's some exciting things coming in the next few months, which
Yeah.
will take Mendix closer to to fully AI assisted coding, not very close to vibe coding, but for me, vibe coding is also something that I would not fully recommend. I like AI assisted coding, which is where you, like the developer or the architect or lead and the AI go hand in hand, but not blindly putting in instructions and letting the AI do everything.
Yeah. And then how you've obviously, talking about vibe coding, obviously there's this big hype, right? There's, a lot of people are jumping, and that's people from non-IT backgrounds and, are getting involved, and, companies like Lovable are blowing up, everywhere, How do you see that kind of playing out? And, obviously, I think Mendix is in a different lane
Mhm.
compared to that. But, as someone who deals with customers, is this something that customers are looking at, thinking about, even just for like, a quick kind of, proof of concept?
So I personally, all my customers, they're already looking into or they're trying platforms like Claude Code, where
Yeah.
they can see the code, they can verify everything.
Mm.
With Lovable, it's totally prompting and seeing the result out there. Now they're bringing in things where you can download the code
Mm.
and review things, but most people are still using Lovable as as a vibe coding tool to build something cool that they can demo,
Yeah,
not
sure.
production ready. So I feel apps made with Claude Code would, or or any other kind of copilot that are through Cursor and all those CLI tools will go faster, will have a more higher percentage of going into production compared to things like Lovable. But remains to be seen, because what I say today or what anyone says today in terms of AI could be totally
Yeah,
wrong.
tomorrow could be another day. Yeah, exactly.
So this is my judgment based on what I
Sure.
know 5 minutes ago. But
Yeah, yeah.
even today evening, right? Not even next week or
Yeah,
tomorrow, it could be
exactly.
different, because they
Yeah,
could release a feature that we did not know was in
yeah.
the planning phases. And yeah,
And speaking about Maya, where do you think it generally, improves the delivery quality, and where do you think, human architectural judgment just remains, a non-negotiable?
at this point, I think with Maya or any other AI also, what they generally help with is generating like boilerplates or accelerating onboarding, right? Where like new developers can learn the apps easily. With Mendix and Maya, they were they were best practice guidance as well. So they're the Maya recommenders that flags issues when they're anti patterns. But human judgment is always non-negotiable when it comes to architectural decisions, or designing the security of the app, or performance architecture, or handling edge cases. AI can do a great job at guiding you with these topics, but it's essentially the humans who have to take the decisions, and humans should be taking the decisions. For example, when I'm evaluating two different things, I always go to AI and ask it for pros and cons. But
Mm,
I'm essentially making the decision, not AI for me.
sure.
And also coming to like where Maya genuinely helps right now to me is finding bugs or issues in the app, right? So I could easily go and say, take this microphone and how could I optimize it,
Mm,
right? Or I'm facing this bug. Where do you think in the app this issue could be? So Maya does a great job. 8 Lite and 8 Pro also do a great job. Now 8 Pro does a great job because these are some of my focus areas. So I've
mm,
tuned it well enough to do those things.
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And if I'm a US enterprise or North American enterprise, evaluating AR powered low code, right? What questions should I be asking these vendors that most aren't prepared to answer?
I think they've been getting these questions for months now. So most
Yeah.
of them are prepared with these. But if I was, but it, it- but the sales teams are prepared to answer these questions. But
Mm,
if I was an enterprise who's evaluating, I would be mainly asking is, for example, uh, Mendix is Maya, right? So my
mm,
question would be, want me to, you have AI assisted coding, which is great, but how does your AI prevent hallucination, right? So, or what are the different validation layers or that you use between like the AI output and the production ready code? So so answering, I think having answered these questions are more important if I'm going to be using Maya only. But that's where these other platforms come in for, or these other extensions come in, right? So Mendix has done a great job in opening up their tools called extensibility APIs.
mm,
Now anyone can go and build an extension. Anyone like me can go and build an extension using these extensibility APIs, and which is great, because if someone asks a salesperson saying, "Oh, how does Maya prevent hallucination?" then and if they don't have an answer for it, then they can say that you could plug in your own AI tools, or you
mm,
could use AI, or you could use 8 Pro, right, where you
mm,
can train your own model or add additional skills to it so that you can avoid it from hallucinating in your own ways. And which is what I've built also in 8 Pro is
mm,
they can add the instructions, like, and they can refine the model how they want all the instruction sets. So that's great. And then, but I think the other question they should be asking is what happens when they outgrow a platform, or what will be the exit strategy? For
mm,
example, data porting data outside Mendix, or exporting code, or what about vendor lock-in? Because with AI coming in doing most of the coding, these become important questions. So I think sales teams also need to be prepared to answer a lot of questions about vendor lock-in. And then with AI, main question is how did you train your how do you train your Maya, or how do you
Yeah,
train your right? Is it based on everything that you saw on internet, or based on just your best
yeah,
practice, right? Because what if my company has my own best practices that Mendix doesn't have?
yeah,
So I think those become really important for any companies to ask.
yeah, yeah. And finally, looking ahead, for you, what do you kind of obviously, like you said, even in an hour, things could change. Things are moving so fast. It's a time where I think it's very disruptive. You personally, what are you kind of most excited about?
I mean, I'm very excited about the direction that AI is taking, right? It's I think it's enabling more and more people. A lot of people are scared about what will happen to their jobs, but I think it'll only increase opportunities, especially when, for example, my company builds 10 things faster. What happens to what happens to other companies? Or if I'm able to build 10 things faster for my own company, which means my process have become faster, right? I'm improving my offerings to my customer. If say even if I'm a manufacturing company, now if my output is faster and cheaper, it goes to someone else, and then
Yeah,
it's a chain effect basically.
yeah, yeah. Well, Neil, it was great to talk to you. Appreciate you sharing, a bit about your journey, the things, it's good to see that, you were introduced to this technology through your network. You've gone from obviously working for them to building, starting as one and now building your own kind of business. And really, you're an MVP, you're adding value to the ecosystem. And I think more of those type of people are needed, especially probably on this side of the pond to kind of create that awareness. So I appreciate you speaking to me, and I look forward to, seeing your post and what else you do.
Yeah. Thank you, Firoz. Thank you for having me. I've been a great fan of all your podcasts. So thank you
Appreciate it.
for spreading the knowledge. You should also be
Appreciate
an
it.
MVP by now, by the way.
No, I prefer to not be. Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, no worries.
Take care.
Thanks.